The argument between John and Kim had reached a fever pitch of playful arrogance. John was insisting that without engineers, doctors would just be wizards with leeches, while Kim retorted that all the bridges in the world wouldn't save John when he inevitably caught a cold from sleeping without a shirt on. Their banter provided a thin veil of normalcy against the oppressive green haze outside until a sharp, golden glint pierced through the canopy. "Look," Sam shouted, pointing her camera toward the sky. High above the tangled mess of the jungle, the sun caught the edge of a glass pane. It was a firewatch tower, a skeletal wooden finger pointing toward the heavens. "Ben, we have to go there. We can get above this mist. Imagine the sunset from the top." I didn't need much convincing. The deeper we went, the more the forest felt like it was leaning in, trying to touch us. I drove with a reckless edge, the GMC's heavy bumper snapping through smaller saplings and grinding over roots that felt far too much like bone. I didn't want to get out. I didn't want to touch the soil. When we finally burst into the small clearing at the base of the tower, a collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. The clearing was surprisingly neat. A small porta-potty tucked under the stairs, a stack of weathered logs, and a shed labeled store/supplies. "Campfire tonight," Kim said, her eyes scanning the log pile. "Real food, real fire." While Kim and John started unloading the steaks and the wood, Sam and I climbed the dizzying flight of stairs. The higher we went, the thinner the green haze became, until we reached the cabin at the top. It wasn't the cozy, rustic lookout I expected. The door was hanging by a single hinge, and the windows had been crudely barricaded from the inside with heavy plywood, though much of the glass was shattered and jagged. Inside, it looked like a desperate bunker. Rusted cans of peaches and beans were scattered in the corners. A bedding of old, moldy blankets lay on the floor near a cold stove. Our boots left the first crisp prints in months of accumulated dust. "Whoa," Sam whispered, her camera panning over a row of heavy wooden slats nailed across the lookout windows. "This is intense. Total Survivor vibes." In the far corner, tucked beneath a rusted metal chair, I spotted several crumpled scraps of yellowed paper. I smoothed one out, seeing the frantic, shaky handwriting of someone who had long since run out of hope. It was a letter for some named Otis, telling them not to go look for whoever wrote the letter. Rest of it was unreadable due to the ink decay. "What's that?" Sam asked, peering over my shoulder. I tried to tilt the paper away, but she was already reading. "Otis? Who's Otis?" "Just some old notes," I muttered, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the altitude. "Someone was staying here. A long time ago, probably." "Ben, look at the ink," she whispered, her finger hovering just above the page. "It's not even faded. And that part about the laughter, what kind of laughter sounds so bad you'd rather go out into that?" She gestured toward the window. "The kind we aren't going to stick around to hear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I shoved the note into my pocket. "It's just a squatter losing their mind, Sam. High altitude, hunger, isolation. People imagine things." "Yeah," Sam said, though she didn't sound convinced. She looked around the cramped, barricaded room. "But you don't nail the windows shut because of an imagination. You do it because something is trying to look in." I stepped toward the door, wanting to lead her away from the moldy blankets and the smell of old peaches. "Let's just get some air, okay? We came up here for the view, not to play detective in a crime scene." Sam took a breath, shaking off the tension as we stepped out onto the narrow walkway. The forest looked dead black from up here, yet it felt really peaceful. "Ben," Sam said softly. She stepped closer, bumping her shoulder against mine. "Thank you. Seriously. I know I've been focused on the content, but being up here, just being here with you guys, it's different. This view, this trip, it's amazing. I don't think I've ever seen anything this beautiful." I looked at her, the light from the campfire below catching the stray hairs around her face, and for a second, everything felt right again. "Glad I could help, Sam," I replied, a small smile finally breaking through. "It's definitely worth the climb." "Best captain ever," she teased, giving my arm a playful squeeze, leaving her camera hanging at her side while she just watched the deep oxygen of the seemingly unending forest. We headed back down to the flickering warmth of the campfire John had started. As the steaks began to sizzle, we sat on the RV's fold-out chairs, the tower looming over us like a silent sentry. "Okay, theories," Sam said, leaning back with a mischievous glint in her eye. I think it was a romantic beast. Like a hermit who fell in love with a forest spirit and locked himself away to protect her from the world. It's tragic. It's poetic. John snorted, flipping a steak with Kim's paring knife. Dream on, Sam. It was definitely a squatter. Probably some homeless guy who found the ultimate penthouse and lived like a king until the canned beans ran out. Simple as that. Kim shook her head, her face illuminated by the orange flames. The barricades were on the inside, John. You don't do that to keep the rain out. I'm thinking someone on the run. A criminal, maybe even a serial killer, waiting for the heat to die down. It's tactical isolation. I stared into the fire, the old man's face from the gas station flickering in my mind. The guy at the shop, he told me we shouldn't come here. He said there shouldn't be any humans left in these woods. Not living ones, anyway. The laughter died down. The only sound was the crackle of the wood and the distant, wet rustle of the green-hazed forest beyond the clearing. Sam shifted closer to the fire, and even John stopped flexing for a second, his eyes darting toward the dark tree line. He clapped me on the shoulder, but his hand was a little tighter than usual. Above us, the tower creaked in the wind, its shattered glass reflecting the dying light like a jagged, unblinking eye. After dinner, the grease from the steaks lingered in the air, mixing with the sharp, clean scent of the pine logs John had piled onto the fire. The clearing felt like a tiny island of light in a sea of encroaching shadows. We sat around the embers, the kind of comfortable silence settling over us that only comes from years of knowing exactly what the other person is thinking. Okay, I have a surprise, Sam said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She reached into her bag and pulled out a wooden board with letters burned into the grain. A Ouija board? Seriously, Sam? Kim rolled her eyes, leaning back against the tire of the GMC. I thought we were aspiring professionals, not Victorian ghost hunters. It's for the aesthetic, Kim. Spiritualism in the secret forest. The engagement will be insane, Sam insisted, setting the planchette in the center. We all placed our fingertips on the wood, the firelight dancing in our eyes. But as the wind picked up, whistling through the jagged glass of the tower above us, Sam's bravado suddenly flickered. She pulled her hands back as if the board had turned ice cold. Actually, no, I think the energy is too weird. Let's not call the spirits tonight. I don't want anything following us into the RV. John let out a deep, booming laugh that shook the tension right out of the air. The queen of content is scared of a piece of plywood? Sam, listen to yourself. This thing is mass-produced by a toy company. If it were actually haunted, do you think they'd sell it in the same aisle as building blocks and board games? It's commercialized plastic and cardboard. If a ghost shows up, I'll put it in a headlock. Whatever, muscle brain, Sam retorted, reaching for her phone to check her stats, only to groan. Ugh, I'm at 4%. This 4K recording is a battery murderer. Kim looked over, a slow, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. She didn't say a word, just nodded toward Sam's oversized gear bag. Sam reached into a side compartment of her bag and, with a flourish, began pulling out bricks of matted plastic and copper. 1, 2, 5. She lined up 11 high-capacity power banks on the folding table like they were her own precious children. Behold, she announced, the lifeblood of the modern era. John's jaw dropped. His own phone had gone dark 20 minutes ago, leaving him unable to track his gains or play his music. Sam, Queen Sam, my favorite person in the world. Please, just one. I'll do the dishes for the rest of the trip. I'll even carry you up the stairs to the tower tomorrow. Sam snatched one of the banks before John could touch it, holding it aloft like a scepter while Kim watched from the shadows, her smirk deepening. Not so fast, peasant, Sam teased, leaning back in her chair and crossing her legs. The royal treasury is closed to those who mocked the spirits. If you want the gift of life for your dead phone, you have to show some respect. Kiss the feet of the queen. I am not kissing your sneakers, Sam, John protested, though he was already hovering near her chair like a golden retriever, hoping for a scrap of food. Ben, help me out here. Tell her I'm too important to be disconnected. Sorry, John. I laughed, poking at the fire with a stick. In this camp, Sam has the power, and you're just a subject. You're on your own. For the next hour, the woods didn't feel so scary. We sat there in the glow of the fire and the buzzing warmth of Sam's string lights, trading insults and memories of third-grade recess. The green haze was still out there, lurking at the edge of the tree line, but inside our little circle, we were untouchable. We were just Ben, Sam, Kim, and John. The same kids who used to share juice boxes, now playing at being adults in a world that felt, for a moment, like it belonged entirely to us. The clock on the dashboard was a dim, glowing ghost, hovering somewhere between midnight and 1. The RV was bathed in a thick, heavy silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's pressing against your eardrums. Everyone had finally drifted off, the sound of their steady breathing the only thing tethering me to reality. John was sprawled out on the couch bed next to me, his massive frame taking up most of the space, while the girls were tucked into the bunk beds at the far back. I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the faint amber glow of the radio dial, my mind looping back to the old man at the shop. His milk-white eye. His warning. Ever since we'd breached the iron gates of Road 234, the world had gone mute. No crickets, no rustle of wind in the leaves, no nocturnal birds. It was a dead zone. Then, the silence broke as deep, agonizing shriek tore through the night, echoing from the lightless gut of the forest. It wasn't a scream I'd ever heard from a human or an animal. It was a jagged, mechanical wrenching sound, like metal being peeled back, layered over a guttural, wet moan of absolute dread. The sound was so raw, so wrong, that it felt like it was vibrating in my very teeth. What was that? Sam's voice was a terrified wisp from the back, instantly awake. "Stay quiet," I hissed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I lunged for the driver's bay, my hand trembling as I flicked off the dim cabin lights, plunging us into total darkness. Oh, the RV rocked. It wasn't a hit, it was a footfall. Something heavy had slammed into the earth maybe 80 meters behind us. Then another. Oh. Inside the darkened cabin, I watched the water in the cup on the dinette table. With every rhythmic strike on the ground, a series of perfect, concentric rings rippled across the surface. Whatever was out there was massive. Sam let out a sharp, choked gasp, her breath hitching as she prepared to scream, but Kim was faster. I heard the scuffle in the dark as Kim clamped her hand tight over Sam's mouth, her own breathing shallow and controlled. Beside me, John was a blur of frantic movement. In the moonlight filtering through the barricaded tower above, I saw him grab the paring knife and the pink canister of pepper spray. He was half-crouched, lunging toward the door with a desperate, stupid bravado, his face set in a mask of Jim Bro defiance. He actually thought he could fight whatever was making that noise. I lunged forward, my fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt, and yanked him back with a strength I didn't know I had. I locked eyes with him, my expression so cold and intense that it stopped the air in his lungs. I shook my head once, a silent, desperate command to stay down. Outside, the guttural, rhythmic moaning continued, never dropping in volume, moving closer with every earth-shaking thud. It sounded like something that was breathing and breaking at the same time. We sat there in the suffocating dark, for friends huddled in that rust bucket listening to whatever we woke up. The darkness inside the GMC felt thick enough to choke on. We had shoved Sam into the tiny shower pod, her body trembling so violently the plastic walls rattled. Kim climbed in after her, wrapping her arms around Sam in a protective, desperate embrace, her hand still clamped over Sam's mouth. I stood in the center of the cabin, my knuckles white as I gripped the heavy, grease-stained cast iron pan. Beside me, John was a coiled spring of terror, the steak knife trembling in his hand, the pepper spray aimed at a door that felt like it was made of paper. We didn't speak. We didn't breathe. We just listened to the rhythmic, bone-deep thrum of it circling us. It was testing the perimeter. I could hear the wet, heavy drag of something moving through the high grass, a slow, methodical prowl. It wasn't an animal looking for a meal. It was an observer studying a specimen. Then, the clock hit 4:30 a.m., that dead hour before dawn where the world is at its coldest. The first strike didn't just shake the RV, it buckled the frame. The fiberglass wall behind the dinette groaned and dinted inward, the structural ribs of the 1973 motorhome screeching under the pressure. There was no breath, no huffing of a predator, just that horrific, mechanical wet moan that sounded like a recording of a man dying played through a broken radio. The RV tilted onto two wheels for a terrifying second before crashing back down. The The water in the cup didn't ripple anymore. It splashed onto the floor. I looked at the wall where the impact happened. There were no claw marks, just a flat, immense pressure that was slowly crushing the vehicle like a soda can. And then, the sound changed. The moan distorted, twisting into a dry, chattering sound that forced its way through the vents. It was laughter, a hollow, rhythmic, inhuman laughter that lacked any human joy. It was the sound of something realizing that the can was full of meat. We heard a sniff, a long, wet intake of air that seemed to vacuum the oxygen right out of the cabin. It lingered at the door's seal, inhaling our fear, our sweat, our very lives. The voice was a jagged ruin. It sounded like someone had sampled my own voice and played it back through a throat filled with gravel and stagnant water. It was wrong. The vowels were too long, the pitch shifting midward like a failing engine. It called us. It whispered our names through the thin metal skin of the RV, over and over, a vile, rhythmic chant that felt like it was physically polluting the air inside. It was an invitation to a nightmare. Sam's eyes rolled back in her head, her body going limp in Kim's arms as she finally succumbed to the terror and passed out. Kim, the girl who always had a plan, was hyperventilating, her cool facade shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She stared at the door, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face in total, silent breakage. Then, just as the first gray sliver of light touched the horizon, there was a final, deafening shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated malice, and the weight vanished. We heard the forest explode as something massive tore through the trees, moving with a speed that defied its size, the heavy thumps fading into the distance until the dead silence returned. We were left in the wreckage of the cabin, for friends huddled in the dark, listening to the sound of our own shattered breathing. The morning sun was a sickly, pale yellow, filtering through the green-hazed canopy like it was being strained through a dirty cloth. When John and I finally stepped outside, the air felt cold and thin. We didn't need to speak. The evidence was written in the earth. A deep impact trench circled the entire clearing, a rhythmic series of craters where the grass had been pulverized into black mulch. Small saplings hadn't just been stepped on, they were crushed into the dirt as if by a hydraulic press. I looked up at the green beast. The right side of the RV was caved in near the upper window, the fiberglass splintered and weeping white dust. The reinforced glass was a spiderweb of cracks, held together by nothing but stubbornness and 1970s glue. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a prank. Something massive and impossible had been playing with us. Charge everything, I barked at John, my voice raspy and stripped of its usual warmth. Use every single one of Sam's power banks. We don't move without full bars. I turned to Kim, who was kneeling by the shower pod. Strap Sam into the seat. Use the lap belts, whatever we have. Sprinkle some water on her. We're leaving. Now. The GMC groaned when I turned the key, a wet, hacking sound that made my heart stop. It stalled twice, the engine shuddering as if it were trying to vomit up the very air it was breathing. On the third try, it roared into a shaky idle. I didn't wait. I slammed it into gear and tore back the way we came. We drove for hours. The odometer ticked away, but the forest didn't change. If anything, the trees seemed to be growing closer together, their branches scraping the roof with a sound like sharpening knives. By 3 p.m., we should have hit the iron gates. We should have seen the gas station. Instead, there was only the endless, suffocating green. Sam finally lurched awake with a blood-curdling shriek, her hands clawing at the air until Kim pinned her shoulders down. Are we really doing this? Kim suddenly snapped, her voice trembling with a jagged, hysterical edge as she looked at me in the rearview mirror. Are we going to pretend that thing didn't call our names? Are we going to pretend we aren't trapped? What do you want from me, Kim? I roared, my grip tightening on the wheel until my knuckles cracked. The fear had finally curdled into a hot, blinding rage. I told all of you the second we hit this road that something felt wrong. The old man at the shop. He warned us, and we treated him like a local creep for the aesthetic. This is on us. No, Sam wailed, her voice breaking into a jagged sob. It's on me. I dragged you here. I wanted the footage. I wanted the secret trail. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with a rhythmic, hopeless grief. John moved toward her, trying to be the anchor, his voice a low, frantic murmur. "Guys, quiet. We need to keep it together. Ben, just keep driving. We'll hit the main road. We just missed a turn." "There are no turns, John," I screamed, slamming my foot onto the brake. The tires bit into the black, oily mulch with a violent shudder, the GMC groaning as it lurched to a dead stop. The force threw John against the dash and sent Kim's medical bag sliding across the floor, spilling gauze like white flower petals. The silence that rushed in was deafening, a heavy, pressurized void that made my ears pop. I sat there, my chest heaving, my hands still fused to the steering wheel. I didn't want to look up. I didn't want to see what was waiting for us at the end of this impossible road. But the others were already leaning forward, their breath fogging the cracked glass of the windshield. "Ben, look," Sam whispered, her voice a fragile thread of hope. Her tears had stopped, leaving muddy tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She pointed a trembling finger through the gap in the spiderweb glass. "We made it. Someone actually lives out here. We're saved." I stared through the glass, but the relief didn't come. I looked at the compass on the dash. It was spinning in slow, lazy circles. We had never found the main road. We had been driving straight for hours, yet the forest density was 10 times thicker than where we had started. We weren't out. We were deeper, tucked into a natural bowl of ancient, towering oaks set a cluster of gray, weather-beaten shacks. They weren't built. They looked like they had sprouted from the earth, made of silvered wood and thatched with rotting moss. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, stone-lined well, its mouth wide and dark like a throat. To the left, a larger building dominated the space, a prayer hall of some kind, with a high, peaked roof and windows covered in heavy, rusted iron bars. There was no smoke from the chimneys, no laundry on the lines, no sound of dogs barking or people talking. It was a village of husks, sitting in the middle of a forest that shouldn't have been able to hide it. "This isn't a town, Sam," I whispered, my hand reaching for the flares I'd packed. "Look at the trees. Look how they're leaning toward the houses." The green haze was thicker here, swirling around the base of the prayer hall like a moat. We weren't looking at our salvation. The forest had led us here. It wants something from us. The engine bay of the GMC hissed violently, a thick plume of white steam erupting from the vents like a dying breath. The V8 had finally given up, the heat of the drive and the strain of the forest taking its toll. We were dead in the water. John and I stepped out first, our boots crunching on the brittle, blackened leaves. The air was cold, sharper and more stagnant than it had been just miles back. I gripped the heavy iron pan, and John held the steak knife low at his side, his knuckles white. The door to the nearest shack creaked open, the sound echoing off the surrounding oaks. 3 men stepped out into the green-hazed light. They were impossibly tall, their limbs elongated and spindly, as if their bones had been stretched on a rack. Their skin was the color of wet parchment, pulled tight over ribs that protruded like the hull of a wrecked ship. But it was their eyes that stopped my heart, bulging, amber spheres that seemed too large for their sockets, unblinking and ancient.